We begin this hour with a country transitioning out of authoritarian rule while another slides further into it. These were the scenes from Hungary as its new Prime Minister, Peter Magyar, was sworn in, marking the end of Viktor Orban's 16-year rule. Huge crowds gathered outside Parliament, where the flag of the European Union was raised for the first time since Orban's government removed it in 2014. In his inaugural address, he called on Hungarians to open a new chapter, pledging he would not rule Hungary, but serve it. It's a stark departure from Viktor Orban, the authoritarian who President Trump and Vice President Vance campaigned for, who worked to dismantle the country's democratic institutions, and a stark contrast with the headlines out of the United States. A Department of Justice targeting Trump's political opponents, while the president himself calls for the Democratic minority leader in Congress to be criminally charged as Republican states rush to gerrymander away majority black districts with the blessing of our Supreme Court. Add to that the start of the 11th week of a war with Iran that Trump continues to insist is not a war, despite all evidence to the contrary. It's at this particularly fraught moment in the world that Trump will head to China for a pivotal summit with Xi Jinping that begins later this week. Joining us now to get into all of this, Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congresswoman, thank you, as always, for joining the weekend.
Good morning. Happy Mother's Day, Jackie, and to all your mothers out there.
Happy Mother's Day to you.
I love the photos. I wish I had submitted one of my late mother. She was amazing, as were my grandmothers. So happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, we love a matriarch around here. I want to start in talking about Hungary, because I think one of the things when you talk to Americans, whether they are at the street at protests, these No Kings protests, or at the grocery store, there's such a feeling of a democratic backslide in this country and evidence to that. And what they say is, how do we get out of it? We can't get out of it. And I think what Hungary shows is that there is a way out of, a democratic backslide, that there is a way to do it. It took them 16 years, but that it's possible. Does that give you hope this morning?
Oh, it does. May it be a bellwether. After all, you remember J.D. Vance went over and stumped for Viktor Orban. And that stumping and Viktor Orban were rejected. And what did Magyar run on? He ran on that he was going to reverse the backsliding of democratic values, but also he was going to undo corruption. So it's early on, but certainly flowing the flag of the EU. These are hopeful signs. And I think much more importantly, may they be a bellwether for our country to actually push back on what we see here under this administration, the destruction of democracy and the grotesque corruption of the Trump administration.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the so-called ceasefire that this administration continues to claim is in place, whether or not you think that's an accurate assessment, and if you have heard or been briefed on any of the intelligence that the Washington Post has reported on, a confidential CIA intelligence delivered this week to administration policymakers, that Iran can survive the U.S. naval blockade for at least 3 to 4 months before facing more severe economic hardship. This is according to 4 people who are familiar with the document. The analysis by the U.S. intelligence community also found that Tehran retains significant ballistic missile capabilities despite weeks of intense U.S. and Israeli bombardment. Is this any information that, as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, you've been briefed on?
I'm a member of both Foreign Affairs and Appropriations, so both very, very relevant to this set of issues. No, we were in district this past week. We're going back to D.C. this week, so hoping for more briefings. But you don't have to even get a classified briefing to understand that this is a war. We are still at war. The ceasefire has not held. We are still striking in Iran, as reported, military locations and other locations. It is such a dangerous time. The strait remains blocked by both U.S. and Iran. Who would have thought that this president would so recklessly and ignorantly get into this war of his own making and now not know how to get out of it? I'm reminded of Yogi Berra, who had such brilliant statements. And he says, if you don't know where you're going to wind up somewhere else. Well, this is somewhere else, and none of us wants to be here. But this is a president who didn't do this with thought or intellect. He was goaded into it by Mr. Netanyahu against probably the good advice of some within his administration, particularly maybe the chairman, Kaine. But he is now, you see him cornered and trapped. You saw him lash out at yet again another female journalist for asking good questions about what is going on globally with the war, as he is driving the beast over what he calls the reflecting pond. He's unwell, he's irrational, and he doesn't know how to get out of this.
You know, Congresswoman, we've been talking a lot since this war began about the increase in gas prices as a result of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. But now I'm wondering, how concerned are you, and how quickly do you think we will get to the point where we will not only be worried about the increase in gas prices, but the shortage of gas?
Oh, I'm very worried about it. And how many of us 3 or 4 months ago were looking at the price of gas every single gas station you go by? I filled up yesterday, and very typically around us, it's $4.69. I found $4.59, so I stopped and tanked up. What is going on in terms of gas prices, and to your point, the potential for gas shortages, is so incredibly reckless and absolutely self-inflicted. And the silly conversation around, well, the prices are going to go down real fast. No, they're not. They go up very fast. They will come down very slowly, but they're only going to come down if we get ourselves out of this pinch, this incredibly reckless, deadly war, excursion, or whatever the president likes to call it. Let's remember, we are a nation at war. We're talking about pre-war prices. You would have thought this was some other time. Pre-war prices versus right now. And I want to remember this Mother's Day, all of the military members, many of my constituents who are over in the Middle East, spending their Mother's Day there, serving our country with a leader who doesn't know how to get out of it. I do want to say that there is a way out of it for this president. Somebody come up with a framework of a concept of a deal so that he can call it a win and we can bring our military home. We've already lost too much. We've spent more than $25 billion. Thousands of civilians are dead. The wreckage, the rubble of this administration needs to come to an end. Give the president a framework of a deal so he can call it a win.
To your point about the gas prices, Darren Woods, the CEO of Exxon, said on Thursday, I think it's obvious to most that if you look at the unprecedented disruption in the world supply of oil and natural gas, the market hasn't seen the full impact of that yet, meaning this isn't going anywhere fast. I want to shift, though, to President Trump's trip to China that's happening this week. I think he leaves on Thursday. On Time magazine writes this: why Trump's China trip is set up to fail. U.S. commanders-in-chief don't typically glad hand their chief adversary, Charlie Campbell writes, while ensnared in a costly and floundering war. Trump is, however, no slave to convention, especially considering the ugly optics of postponing the trip a second time. What is much more certain is that nothing substantive will materialize from the summit. One of the things that we are hearing, Chinese military analysts are openly arguing that America's weakness in their eyes in Iran means China could try and think of at least taking Taiwan with less resistance. Has that argument, has that concern kind of penetrated the House Foreign Affairs Committee that you sit on, and most importantly, the Republicans that are there? Are they concerned?
I can't speak entirely for the Republicans, though we have had important briefings on that very issue. This trip to China for the president, of course, they will dazzle him with all kinds of pomp and ceremonies and I guess glitz that he might envy and try to copy. But what we have talked about is, of course, the known threat to Taiwan. And while that article argues that nothing substantive will happen, I would argue negative substantive will happen. We need to be dealing with China through through a position of strength, which we can't do now as a result of all of the president's actions, including this ridiculous, dangerous incursion and war in Iran. We needed to be dealing with the human rights violations. We needed to be dealing very boldly with the IP theft, with the fentanyl, the issues of fentanyl. But instead, and many other issues. But instead, what's going to happen, which I think is irresponsible, is we'll wind up selling them more chips, and we will try to stop the sale of weapons and military goods to Taiwan. So we're actually working on the wrong side. We can't challenge them very adequately on their coziness with Russia or North Korea because of all of this president's irrational actions that have not helped bring peace. Remember, the president was going to do two things: bring peace on day one and bring prices down. He's done the exact opposite through his ignorance and incompetence, and also his focus on the grift. So I don't know how he can have an honest conversation with Xi on any of these really important issues.
Congresswoman, we are way out of time, but I have to ask you a domestic question. Earlier, you talked about the destruction of democracy, and I'm just here at home, and I'm